Ladies and gentlemen, Season 7, Episode 8, Together Again. This is the episode which concludes the filler arc of Trace and Rafa. I had to think about their names for a second there. The best characters in the show? Yeah, we'll go with best. I think best works, right? Yeah. These are, Anyways... This was the best episode of this quad. It's not saying much, but it is the best one. You can change who you are, but you cannot run from yourself. A quote about identity, which will work much better in an episode that actually had anything to do with identity. By the way, and I think some people pointed this out in chat when I was off eating dinner, I absolutely love how this episode makes so little reference of the previous episode that if you ejected it completely from existence, you would not even notice that it was vanished. It's not there. Even the bit where Bo-Katan shows up just kind of could be placed here without the previous iteration. Trace flat out mentions she's only choosing Ahsoka's side in this particular argument between Ahsoka and Rafa. In this specific issue, rather than in general. Like, you're taking her side just on this issue. But then Rafa's immediate reaction to that is, but I'm the one who always takes care of you. And I wanted to point that out, because there's this weird thing where people tend to assume that if you take their side, you have to take their side in everything, not just one thing. Oh, shoot, I just described the United States political system again, didn't I? I can't get away from polemic topics. What do you want from me? This is going to be doubly funny depending on when this episode goes live on YouTube, which I don't even know right now. So, they go to the dude, and he's got a freaking throne. I do actually like this scene. This is a legitimately good scene. Ahsoka, there's a lot of good double talk going on. As Ahsoka's saying one thing to villain guy, I don't think I ever caught his name, and to Trace and Rafa. It's good. It's a good shtick. It's a good bit. And I'm kind of with it. There's also a little undercurrent going on here. It's a theme that's dominant in a huge amount of Star Wars. That theme is, there's always a bigger fish. Now, that's not actually 100% true, because, let's be honest, there are some people who just sit at the top. But you can see how this is a thing. You can see how this lines up surprisingly well. So then Bo-Katan is there again. Okay. Then there's a line that's a little bit too obvious. It's actually not a line. It's the dialogue and the voice direction. I'm sorry to keep... Listen, Bionic Bong. Fish. Pike on a stick. What's funny is we had fish for dinner. I'm not actually joking. It was mahi-mahi in our case, not pike. That you know of. But Trace... God, she's an idiot. I know she's stupid. I know she's naive. I know she doesn't understand the world around her. But the fact that she and Rafa have to literally explain the plot of what's happening to the audience is just kind of... Did you notice that the Pikehead didn't even insist on tracking them or sending one of his own people with them? Like... There's also this tidbit where Rafa cannot stand holding a debt to someone that she owes. It's like a point of pride. I was going to do a whole discussion about that, but, you know, I don't think I care enough. I apologize. So then we get to the next scene, and you notice that the next scene involves Trace explaining the plot to the audience. Again, literally one scene later. Having said that, I do actually like how Rafa is able to talk her way around the random foreman guy, right? The guy running the lifts where they're loading the spice shipment. And I mean that because it's probably the best part of the episode, and I say that with total sincerity. I know I come across as if I hammer this point endlessly, but I really like it when a fiction is willing to zoom the camera way down to the ground level. We see some lower tier stuff, right? Higher stakes, higher personal significance. Way down here. And the reason why is this is kind of like the continuity thing I discussed just a bit ago with this very show, actually. The reason why I bang on that so often is A, I happen to like those kind of stories, but B, good, grounded stories are pretty rare. We don't see that very often because, well, because the overwhelming perception or reality, I'm not sure which, is that the common movie-going and game-going audience wants big. Every story, every villain, every threat has to one-up the previous. There's so many examples of this, I don't even know where to start. This is absolutely everywhere, to the point where I find it aggravating. So yeah, I know I bang on this point a lot, but the reason I bang on this point so much is because it keeps being a really rare thing. Thus, this sequence, where it's just these two yahoos who barely know their way around a blaster, who are pushing around other people who are way down there, I'm with that, actually. This was engaging. Their fight with the actual manager, their negotiating and trying to strong-arm the guy, the way Rafa pushes him is actually great. She comes across as just aggressive enough without coming across as too much of a prat, right? The way she strong-arms him. And there's this other little tidbit where she specifically invokes fear in him. And she can only pull this off because she's talking to someone who's a member of a criminal organization. And, well, there's no up, down, left, or right about this. When you're running an organization that runs on fear, you have created your own weakness because anyone can infiltrate it by preying on the fear of your own subordinates. Which is exactly what she does, by the way. So that actually works. It's the better part of the episode, and it definitely drags the episode up above the previous three. Meanwhile, Ahsoka is definitely Anakin-ing things. Let me just go ahead and set a few bombs here and there. Sure, that works. And then Darth freaking Maul shows up. It wasn't out of nowhere. Maul has been a regular element of Clone Wars. So, you know, I'm with it. Having him be present here is not something that I'm particularly against. I'm with it. I'm with it. In fact, I feel like he was actually doing a decent job here with his presentation and with how he was acting. And of course, he's still building up his little criminal empire. The only thing that makes me wonder here is how the hell did he get away from Palpatine? Is that ever explained anywhere? Yeah, he also has been dealing with the Pikes, and Bo-Katan is specifically pretty anti-Maul, so okay, I'm with that. Got it, in the comics. Cool. Sure. I hate to nitpick things. How does Maul see in his hologram form? Let me try to explain that a little bit. So Ahsoka is down here looking up at Maul. They're on a catwalk, right? And Maul glances over and then walks over and looks down over the ledge. What is Maul, not the hologram of Maul, but the real Maul, looking at there? What is he seeing? We've seen for a fairly large amount of the series how these kind of holograms work. What it usually does is it specifically scans an image of the person you're talking to. And usually just that person, not the surrounding terrain, not anything around them, just that person. So what Maul, in his perspective, is probably looking at is literally the floor of wherever he is. He just wanders over like, And I get what they're going for, really. But at the same time, huh? I hate to nitpick, because that is a minor thing, but the whole time I'm just sitting there going... He's looking, there's a Lego right there, and he's like, oh, I don't want to step on that later. There's a bug running across his floor at that exact moment in time. Now, because I think way too much about things like technology and science and physics and the rules of the setting, right? All the ways in which a setting worked. I started thinking about that because Star Trek has this interesting little rule. In order to properly humanize holograms, what they usually do, with holographic life forms or holograms in general in Star Trek is the specific sensors that are pulling in visible data are actually centered around roughly where the eyes are. And now, there's more I could go into this, but I don't want to derail into a Star Trek discussion. The point is, they really do, like, the projection of them really is scanning things kind of like this, right? And that's where it's processing in the input. That's why the Doctor can run around to do something like this, because he understands that this is where his visual input's coming in from. It's also worth noting in Star Trek that that's not necessary. They don't really get into it. Yeah, Vic does this too. It's not necessary for that to be a thing. It is entirely feasible that the hologram could just take in all of the sensory input from whatever sensors exist at sickbay, or from his entire body simultaneously. Now, that would obviously cause some sensory issues because he's not programmed to handle that, but that is something that is fundamentally possible. The hardware allows that, for lack of a better way to put that. And I got thinking, what if Star Wars technology had something similar? An actual sensor it could project into the hologram to pull a little bit, to allow you to see through your specific holographic projector. Probably not standard model. Probably the kind of thing that would be very, very expensive or very difficult to come by. Or might literally be Force Attack, which I know I shouldn't call it that. What was the name? Rax, you suggested another name for that. Was it literally just Force Tech? I don't remember. I'm sorry. But either way, some kind of Force Tech that could actually work for that. Just food for thought, because as usual, I tend to be thinking about things like this. Anyways. So, yeah, I call it Force Attack out of pure habit. I really shouldn't. Because I've been calling it that for years. That's really what it comes from. And that itself is based off of Magitech. But I'm getting off topic. So, Ahsoka's taken prisoner. And my first thought is, okay, that makes sense. They want to kidnap her and imprison her so she can be a bargaining chip to Maul. Okay, logical. And then they say, now we will execute you. Then why didn't you do that earlier? Why did you stun her, take her prisoner, and then tell her you're going to execute her? Why did you allow the other two people to enter into the room where you're about to execute her? Why aren't you even, like, broadcasting? Why aren't you calling Maul to be like, hey, Maul, we brought you a Jedi, we're going to kill her? What are they doing? I'm actually confused about their tactics here. Like, huh? None of this makes any kind of sense, of course. We cut back to the much more interesting and well-written sequence where Trace and Rafa are fighting what I believe is a Trandoshan, who, of course, she's got to be really, really lucky that this guy is a middle manager and not someone who's actually, trained to fight for a living, because it's probably the only reason she is alive at all. But anyways, nice little touch, nice little sequence. Like I said, I like the low-tier stuff of it. I like that they win with a literal pipe, right, So then they have their big escape sequence. Okay. Do they really need to be spending now to be arguing about the fact that she hid that she was a Jedi? Is this the best time for that? In universe and out, like from both perspectives. I have a question for you. How many of you remember that Trace is a bad pilot? Well, I see the writers of the episode over there are not actually raising their hands, because she's just perfectly fine of a pilot here. In fact, she pulls some maneuvers that would honestly be pretty hard to pull off. I'm not talking about super Amazo stuff, but what? Anyway, so they have a bit of drama. It only lasts a few seconds. I'll give them credit on that. I know this is faint praise, but at least the episode could be a lot worse than it is. And there's this really nice moment where they're talking to Ahsoka, and, I told you I'm not a Jedi. And Rafa says, you act like a Jedi. And Ahsoka's face just lights up at that. Did you see that? Like her whole face was kind of downcast, and she's just, when she hears that. It's a nice little touch. And it does say a lot about what she's probably thinking in her head. What a Jedi should be. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. When Ahsoka is well written, she's a good Jedi. One of the good Jedis, of which there is a disturbingly small number. We talked about that earlier, right? Corruption and stagnancy, right? Either way, I do like that little tidbit. And then Bo-Katan shows up and says, hey, we're going after Maul. You have 5 minutes to decide. Peace. And this, of course, is going to lead into some things that's going to be relevant in the future. And then we cut off, and that's the end. So then my niece shows up, I think. I don't even see anybody. I'm almost done, kiddo. Give me a minute. And yeah, and then the real plot shows up. Exactly. The filler episode's over, and we've been able to move forward to the point where we're actually at the real episode. Holy crap. I did talk about the cool Trandoshan dock worker. Really, I did. It's the only part of the episode I actually liked. Was the interaction and fight with Rafa and Trace and like some dock workers, right? Like that was the good part of the episode. Chunk. And that's the end. So I do think we have salvaged this from blue territory. But if I'm being honest, I feel like this might still be in the realm of green. It still has almost all of the same problems as before. Bad voice directing, bad dialogue, bad execution of interesting ideas. There are a few moments which drag it up, which pull it up from the previous thing. But, you know, I still feel like this is a below average episode. And I see a lot of people are agreeing with me in chat, so I think we'll go ahead and swing that way. The arc as a whole, blue. Now, I know that sounds weird, because we only had one blue in the entire episode. But no, I stand by that firmly. This arc has no real reason to exist. Picture this for just a second. If you went straight from Ahsoka being like, damn, I have nowhere to go, to being found by Bo-Katan, to going after Maul, what would you have lost? Now, hang on a second. Let me clarify that for a moment. Not every episode has to be some big thing, right? Not every episode has to be some massive character piece or some major plot moment. There's nothing wrong with good filler. That's something I've pushed very often. We always call filler a bad thing, but that's because most filler is bad, right? So we could have had a breather arc here in the middle. Yeah, good filler usually develops characters or fleshes out the setting a little bit more. Honestly, just gives people a little bit of a chance and room to breathe. Gives some actors a chance to really bounce off of each other, have some good little moments, and have some good little fun stuff, right? I can actually name a specific example of an episode that almost manages this. It's an episode of Voyager, because Voyager's been fresh in my mind lately. But there's an episode of Voyager called Worst Case Scenario, okay? Hear me out for a second. In that episode, they're just playing a holodeck video game. I know they don't call it a video game, but it is. It is. It's like it's a really fancy choose your own adventure. That's it. That's the episode. Until like the last 10 minutes. So the first 30 minutes of that episode is pure filler. There's no threat of the week. There's no danger. There's no big plot point. It's just the characters bouncing, interacting with the game. We learn more about the characters from how they interact with the game. We see the game itself and how they process it. We learn how they understand writing process. We see how each of them think differently in terms of role-playing. I even use that episode as an example of a difference between a role player and a role player, if you'll forgive me for explaining this very, very briefly. A role player is someone who gets into character, cares about the narrative, cares about the story, says, this is what my character would do. A role player cares about this. That might not be visible on camera. But in case you can't tell, this is a dice. Get it? Or if I can really make my point here, a role player. Cool? It's good. It's good showing that variance between the crew members. It's good showing how they interact with each other and how they interact with the program. And it's good filler. And it's just there to be a breather. Nothing significant happens to the last 10 minutes. By the way, the last 10 minutes ruins that episode, but let's just... There, it's gone. Okay, now it's a good episode. And that could have worked if they wanted to do something like that. But they didn't, clearly. They wanted this to be its whole thing. So now I know what you're thinking. Well, but Lore, there was so much potential here. Yes, they could have done some good stuff here. They didn't. They had they had Ahsoka, they had the Undercity, they had politics and economics of the war, and criminal organizations, which, I remind you, at this point in history, are running rampant. I don't actually know if this is still true in the AU. Malachor could probably fact-check me on this one. But last I checked, this era of history right here, the later end of the Clone Wars, is when the crime of the galaxy is at its absolute worst. Crime is running rampant right now because there's just so much going on with the Clone Wars. And so this is a perfect time to kind of dig into that, take a bite out of that particular chunk of story and that chunk of history. And there's so much cool potential here, and that's it. They don't do anything with any of it. Hell, they even have a wonderful story idea, which I just finished talking about. The down-to-earth thing, the grounded thing. They don't do anything with that either, except for one sequence across 2 scenes in 1 episode. There's so much they could have done with this arc, and they didn't. That's why the arc is blue. Sure, simple camper. Oh, wow, casual. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. Yeah. Anyways. That's it for now. Tomorrow, roughly 10 a.m., 9 a.m., whenever I get going, Eastern Standard Time, whenever I finish, we're going to go and start the next one. The next episode coming up is Season 7, Episode 9, Old Friends Not Forgotten. And that's the final arc, and we'll be finishing that tomorrow during the first shift. I hope to see you there.